the most dangerous people you'll ever meet. Machiavelli's warning about psychopaths. Have you ever met someone who seemed perfectly charming and trustworthy, but something about them just felt off? Maybe they made big promises they never kept, or could turn their charm on and off like a switch. Or perhaps you've worked with someone who took credit for everyone else's work, blamed others for their mistakes, and somehow always failed upward despite leaving destruction in their wake. If this sounds familiar, you might have encountered what modern psychology calls a psychopath. Someone with a specific set of personality traits that make them experts at manipulation and completely unconcerned with how their actions hurt others. These aren't just difficult people, they're actually wired differently, and they can cause enormous damage in workplaces, relationships, and entire societies. Hey everyone, welcome back. In our previous videos, we explored how Machiavelli understood the unconscious mind centuries before Freud, and how he anticipated Skinner's insights on behavioral conditioning. Today, we're diving into something even more fascinating: how Machiavelli described psychopathic behavior patterns 5 centuries before modern psychology identified and categorized them. 500 years ago, Machiavelli wasn't just writing about how rulers should behave. He was also warning about dangerous personality types that could destroy organizations and societies. Then in the late 20th century, psychologist Robert Hare developed what's now considered the gold standard for identifying psychopathic traits: the psychopathy checklist. What's mind-blowing is how perfectly Machiavelli's descriptions of dangerous personalities align with what modern science now confirms. Before we go further, I want to clarify something important. When I talk about psychopaths, I'm not using the term the way Hollywood does, as a synonym for violent criminals or serial killers. In psychology, psychopathy refers to a specific constellation of personality traits that exists on a spectrum. Most psychopaths never commit violent crimes, but they do cause significant harm through manipulation, deception, and emotional exploitation. And they're far more common than most people realize. So let's dive into what Machiavelli understood about these dangerous personalities, how modern science has confirmed his observations, and, most importantly, how you can protect yourself when you encounter them. Let's start with the core insight both Machiavelli and Hare share. Some people can mimic normal human emotions without actually experiencing them. Machiavelli wrote about advisors and political figures who could appear merciful, faithful, humane, sincere, religious, while being none of those things internally. He wasn't describing simple hypocrisy. He was identifying people who could convincingly wear these emotions like masks while feeling nothing underneath. Centuries later, Hare would identify this same trait as the defining feature of psychopathy: a profound emotional shallowness combined with the ability to simulate normal emotional responses. As he puts it, psychopaths know the words, but not the music of emotions. They can intellectually understand and mimic feelings like empathy, remorse, and love without actually experiencing them. I once worked with an executive who was a textbook example of this. In meetings, he could display perfect empathy, leaning forward, making appropriate facial expressions, saying all the right things. But the moment the person in distress left the room, he would immediately switch to another topic without any transition, as if the emotional moment never happened. There was no lingering effect because the empathy wasn't real. It was a performance that served a purpose. Machiavelli was particularly concerned with how these individuals used charm and flattery to advance themselves. He warned about advisors who present things which appear all profit and no loss, and who are ready with their services in times of prosperity, but in adversity they turn away. He was describing what Hare would later identify as superficial charm and manipulative behavior, the ability to be extremely likable when it serves their purpose, only to disappear or turn on you when you're no longer useful. I witnessed this dynamic in a marketing team where a new hire quickly became everyone's favorite colleague. He remembered birthdays, brought coffee, offered to help with projects, and charmed senior leadership. But when the department faced layoffs, he immediately provided leadership with a detailed list of everyone else's performance issues, many fabricated or exaggerated, to ensure he survived the cuts. The persona of helpful team player was instantly replaced by ruthless self-preservation the moment circumstances changed. Both Machiavelli and Hare noted another key trait: grandiose self-worth. Machiavelli described dangerous advisors who believe themselves more wise and able than in fact they are, people with an inflated sense of their own abilities and importance. Hare would later document this same pattern. Psychopaths typically have a dramatically inflated view of their own talents and contributions, even when objective evidence shows otherwise. This grandiosity makes them particularly dangerous in organizational settings. I consulted for a company where a mid-level manager claimed credit for an entire department's successes while blaming all failures on his team. Despite mediocre results, he convinced senior leadership he was irreplaceable. When finally terminated, after causing several top performers to quit, financial auditing revealed he had been manipulating performance metrics for years while extracting increasing compensation and perks. Another trait both Machiavelli and Hare identified is pathological lying. Machiavelli wrote that certain personality types are ready to swear to anything, but when the need arises, they break their oath with equal readiness. He wasn't describing occasional dishonesty. He was describing people who lie constantly, seamlessly, and without any of the normal physiological signs of discomfort that most people show when being dishonest. Hare would later document this same pattern, noting that psychopaths lie with such ease and confidence that they often pass lie detector tests. They don't experience the anxiety or cognitive discomfort normal people feel when lying, which makes their deception particularly convincing. I saw this trait in action when a consulting firm hired what seemed like a superstar with impressive credentials. He told detailed, captivating stories about his previous work with major clients and his personal connections with industry leaders. Everyone was impressed, until a routine background check revealed almost none of it was true. When confronted, rather than showing shame or anxiety, he simply shifted to new, equally convincing stories to explain the misunderstanding. The lies were constant, detailed, and delivered without any sign of discomfort. Perhaps the most chilling trait both Machiavelli and Hare identified is a complete lack of remorse or guilt. Machiavelli described individuals who could commit terrible acts and yet be able to color them in such a way as to give the appearance of virtue. He was identifying people who feel no guilt about harming others and are concerned only with managing how their actions are perceived. Hare would later identify this absence of remorse as one of the most reliable indicators of psychopathy. What makes this trait particularly dangerous is that without the internal break of guilt, there's no natural limit to what these individuals might do to achieve their goals. I once worked with a manager who systematically took credit for subordinates' work while blaming them for his mistakes. When one employee confronted him privately, he engineered that person's termination through a campaign of subtle undermining and false accusations. When asked later if he had any regrets about destroying someone's career, he replied with genuine confusion, "Why would I? He was in my way." There was no guilt, no second-guessing, just a cold calculation of self-interest. Both Machiavelli and Hare also observed a common behavioral pattern in these personalities: a parasitic lifestyle. Machiavelli wrote about advisors who seek to build their own fortune on the ruins of their prince, describing people who systematically exploit others for personal gain without contributing value themselves. Hare would later identify this same pattern, noting that psychopaths typically live off others' efforts while contributing little themselves. They see relationships primarily as opportunities for exploitation rather than mutual exchange or contribution. I consulted for a startup where one co-founder displayed this pattern perfectly. While others worked 80-hour weeks developing the product, he spent his time networking at conferences and cultivating media relationships. He contributed virtually nothing to the actual business, but positioned himself as the face of the company. When acquisition offers came, he maneuvered to maximize his payout while minimizing others' shares, despite their much greater contribution to the company's success. Both Machiavelli and Hare also noted these personalities' poor behavioral controls, their tendency toward impulsivity and low frustration tolerance. Machiavelli described advisors who rush wildly into affairs driven by hunger for money or ambition, describing people whose impulses override prudence and long-term thinking. Hare would later identify impulsivity as a core psychopathic trait. Despite often being skilled manipulators, psychopaths typically have poor self-regulation in other areas, resulting in erratic behavior when their desires are frustrated. I witnessed this trait when a seemingly polished executive completely lost control during a minor disagreement in a meeting. For a moment, the carefully maintained mask of charm dropped, revealing a frightening rage that left everyone stunned. The incident was never mentioned again, and he resumed his charismatic persona immediately afterward. But it was a glimpse behind the facade that no one forgot. Another trait both identified is what Hare calls shallow affect, a limited range of genuine emotions. Machiavelli wrote about people who have neither the natural nor artificial emotions that can be observed in all men. He wasn't calling them unemotional. He was describing something more specific, a certain emotional flatness or shallowness underneath the simulated responses. I observed this quality in an otherwise charming manager who displayed perfectly appropriate emotional responses in professional situations, but showed striking emotional poverty in unguarded moments. During casual conversations, he would analyze others' emotions with detached curiosity rather than empathetic understanding. He could describe what emotions should be felt in various situations, but seemed to experience only a narrow band himself, primarily irritation, satisfaction, or boredom. Both Machiavelli and Hare also identified what modern psychology calls a failure to accept responsibility. Machiavelli noted how certain advisors are ready to attribute everything good to their own prudence and everything bad to the malignity of fortune. He was describing people who systematically take credit for successes while blaming external factors for failures. This pattern is particularly dangerous in organizational settings because it prevents learning and accountability. I worked with a director who had an impressive record of successes on paper, but closer examination revealed a pattern. He joined projects that were already succeeding, claimed credit, and then moved to new opportunities before inevitable problems emerged. When problems did occur on his watch, he had an extraordinary ability to shift blame to others while maintaining his reputation. Perhaps most importantly, both Machiavelli and Hare recognized these individuals' extraordinary ability to identify and exploit others' weaknesses. Machiavelli wrote that certain personalities have great self-possession and cunning, making themselves appear open, trustworthy, and full of goodwill. Yet beneath this show of virtue, they hide unscrupulous duplicity. He was describing people with an almost predatory ability to identify what others need or want, then appear to offer exactly that while actually pursuing their own agenda. I saw this trait in action when a new hire quickly determined each colleague's insecurities and desires, then tailored his approach accordingly. With the insecure manager, he was deferential and admiring. With ambitious peers, he offered connections and opportunities. With nurturing types, he shared personal struggles. Each person thought they had a uniquely genuine connection with him, not realizing he was presenting completely different personas to different people based on what would gain their trust. So how can you protect yourself from these dangerous personalities? Both Machiavelli and modern psychology offer some guidance. First, look for patterns rather than isolated incidents. Machiavelli advised judging people by the results of their actions over time rather than their words or occasional gestures. Psychopaths are often skilled at making positive first impressions and performing generous acts when strategically valuable. But over time, a pattern of self-serving behavior usually emerges. I watched a consulting firm waste months on a candidate who interviewed brilliantly and had impressive references. Had they investigated more thoroughly, they would have discovered his pattern: joining companies, creating stellar first impressions, extracting maximum resources and advancement, then leaving abruptly when accountability loomed. A pattern he repeated at multiple organizations. Second, pay attention to how they treat people who can't help them. Machiavelli noted that dangerous personalities treat people differently based solely on their usefulness. One of the most reliable indicators of character is how someone treats people from whom they have nothing to gain. I observed an executive who was unfailingly charming with superiors and strategic peers, but dismissive and even cruel to support staff and junior employees. This stark contrast in behavior based solely on others' utility to him was a clear warning sign that many missed by only seeing how he treated them personally. Third, trust demonstrated behavior over words. Machiavelli warned about people whose promises exceed their actions. With psychopathic personalities, there's typically a significant gap between what they say and what they actually deliver. I worked with a manager who made grandiose promises to his team about resources, recognition, and advancement. Team members who believed these promises were inevitably disappointed, while those who judged him based on past behavior, a history of broken commitments, protected themselves from exploitation. Fourth, be wary of the too good to be true situation. Machiavelli warned about advisors who present options with all profit and no loss. Psychopaths are skilled at creating offers that seem impossibly perfect, concealing the actual costs until you're already committed. I consulted for a company that partnered with what seemed like an ideal client offering extraordinary terms. Only later did they discover the hidden costs and constraints that made the deal extremely unfavorable. The executive who negotiated it had deliberately concealed these aspects while emphasizing the benefits, creating an illusion of perfect opportunity. Fifth, maintain strong boundaries. Machiavelli advised keeping potentially dangerous individuals at a distance where you can observe their actions, but they cannot affect your own. With psychopathic personalities, clear boundaries are essential because they typically test and gradually erode limits. I witnessed a junior employee's boundaries being systematically dismantled by a manipulative supervisor who started with small requests outside normal expectations, gradually increased demands, and used emotional manipulation to override objections. By the time the employee recognized the exploitation, the normal boundaries of the professional relationship had been so eroded that extraction was extremely difficult. Let's address an important question. What's the difference between Machiavellian strategy and psychopathic manipulation? After all, Machiavelli himself advised rulers on tactics that might seem manipulative. The critical difference lies in purpose and empathic capacity. Ethical Machiavellian strategy acknowledges the realities of human psychology and power dynamics, but uses this understanding for legitimate goals while maintaining basic empathy for others. Psychopathic manipulation uses similar tactics, but without empathic constraint and purely for self-interest, regardless of harm caused. For example, a leader using Machiavellian insights might strategically balance rewards and punishments to maintain organizational discipline. They understand human psychology, but still fundamentally care about their people's well-being and the organization's legitimate mission. A psychopathic personality uses similar tactics, but with crucial differences. They feel no genuine concern for others' well-being, have no commitment to organizational purpose beyond personal gain, and will cause unlimited harm to others if it serves their interests. I've seen this distinction in action. One CEO made tough decisions during a financial crisis, including layoffs that caused real pain. However, he was transparent about the situation, took the largest personal pay cut, provided maximum possible support to affected employees, and was genuinely distressed by the impact on people's lives. He was using Machiavellian realism, but with intact empathy and legitimate purpose. In contrast, another executive engineered a crisis to justify eliminating rivals, replaced them with loyal supporters, extracted increased compensation for managing the difficult situation, and showed no concern for the careers he destroyed in the process. The tactics were superficially similar, but the absence of empathy and purely self-serving motivation revealed the psychopathic pattern. So what can we learn from this exploration of how Machiavelli anticipated modern understanding of psychopathic personalities? First, that these dangerous character types have existed throughout history and operate in predictable patterns. Second, that recognizing these patterns early can save you from enormous personal and professional damage. Most importantly, this knowledge gives us power. When you understand how manipulative personalities operate, their tactics become more visible and less effective. What makes psychopaths dangerous isn't just their lack of empathy, it's also our failure to recognize them until significant damage has been done. For your own development, start paying attention to patterns of behavior in your professional and personal relationships. Look beyond charisma and first impressions to consistent actions over time. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong about someone who seems perfect on paper, and maintain clear boundaries with anyone who shows signs of these problematic traits. Next time, we'll explore how Machiavelli's insights intersect with Martha Stout's research on sociopathy in everyday life, examining how the principles we've discussed operate in normal social settings and what that means for ethical leadership. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you encountered people with these traits in your workplace or personal life? What warning signs did you notice, and how did you protect yourself? Let me know below. This information is provided for educational purposes only. The goal is to help you recognize manipulative patterns and protect yourself from exploitation, not to encourage unethical behavior or amateur diagnosis of mental health conditions.